The courtroom was supposed to be quiet, one of those routine mornings where paperwork outweighed tension until the police chief exploded. His face blazed crimson, veins rising like wires ready to snap. As he leaned over the railing and growled at Judge Napolitano with an animalistic fury, "I own you, pig." The words cracked through the room like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the benches. A young mother clutched her child. An officer froze mid-step. Even the fluorescent light seemed to flicker in disbelief, freeze in that suspended second. The chief's twisted snarl hangs midair, his badge reflecting the very authority he'd just shattered. And yet this wasn't anger, it was entitlement. The kind that grows when power goes unquestioned for too long. The narrator steps in. How did a man entrusted to protect the public descend into this level of arrogance? How did someone sworn to uphold the law feel bold enough to spit in the face of it? This moment wasn't born out of sudden rage. It was the final eruption in a volcano that had been rumbling for years. Complaints buried, officers intimidated, evidence misplaced, and one judge who refused to look the other way because today wasn't just another hearing. Today was the first time someone pushed back. Today was the first time the chief's shadow didn't make the room shrink. And that single sentence, "I own you," didn't just disgrace him. It nearly dragged an entire department into collapse. But what forced a police chief to explode like this, and how Judge Napolitano responded, left the courtroom trembling. The hearing had begun quietly, almost too quietly for what it would become. What was meant to be a simple review of minor misconduct had turned into the most anticipated disciplinary trial in the state. Every news outlet had a camera pointed at the courtroom door. Bloggers were already live-tweeting theories. TikTok creators had built entire timelines of the chief's controversies, while commentators on both sides framed the story as proof that America's faith in authority was cracking. Judge Andrew Napolitano sat composed, glasses perched low, his tone calm but razor-precise. Across from him sat Police Chief Randall Briggs, broad-shouldered, medals glinting under fluorescent light, jaw locked in defiance. To the public, Briggs was a hero who kept order. To his critics, he was a man who confused obedience with justice. The line between leadership and tyranny was getting thinner by the minute. The case itself seemed straightforward. Reports of intimidation, falsified patrol logs, a whistleblower officer alleging that Briggs used his badge to silence internal dissent. But what simmered beneath was far greater, a culture of fear that stretched across precincts, one that dared no one to speak his name out loud. Every question Judge Napolitano asked seemed to chip at a wall that had stood for years. Every measured word from the bench echoed louder than any gavel strike. Outside, protesters gathered with handmade signs, "Justice isn't rank, truth over badges." Inside, the chief's attorneys whispered, sensing the tide turning. Yet in his eyes burned a refusal to yield. He wasn't just defending his reputation, he was defending an empire built on loyalty and fear. The journalists could feel it, the spectators could sense it. This wasn't about one man on trial. It was about whether integrity could survive unchecked power. And just when the tension seemed ready to snap, flicker crossed the chief's face, a twitch of the jaw, a tightening of the fist. No one knew it yet. But the chief was minutes away from detonating, the moment that would define his career forever. Randall Briggs didn't rise through the ranks, he muscled his way up them. From his earliest patrol days, he discovered that fear worked faster than respect. A slammed locker here, a barked order there, and soon younger officers stepped aside when he walked through the precinct hallway. Supervisors called him effective. But everyone else knew the truth. Briggs won obedience the way a storm wins silence by suffocating everything beneath it as he climbed positions. His tactics sharpened. He bent rules with the confidence of a man convinced the rules existed for everyone except him. Paperwork disappeared when it needed to. Dashcam footage accidentally corrupted itself. Complaints somehow dissolved before seeing daylight. Nothing stuck to him, not because he was clean, but because he controlled the very hands that carried the broom. Over time, he built what officers privately called the kingdom. His inner circle handpicked, Loyalists treated him less like a chief and more like a monarch. They laughed too loudly at his jokes, echoed his opinions before he finished speaking, and nodded at every thunderous declaration he made in staff meetings. In exchange, they received choice assignments, unspoken immunity, and the privilege of being protected by his shadow. To question him was to be exiled. To challenge him was to have your career quietly suffocated. Yet in public, Briggs crafted a different face entirely. He spoke at charity events about community partnership. He posed for photographs with grieving families, hand over heart, eyes full of practiced empathy. Local news stations adored him. He was quotable, dramatic, and always ready with a patriotic soundbite. Citizens saw medals and crisp uniforms. Officers saw a man who believed the badge gave him ownership of the world. Past complaints existed in abundance, but they never saw sunlight. One officer reported being threatened after questioning a manipulated arrest report. Another claimed Briggs screamed inches from his face, promising he'd bury anyone who crossed him. But each complaint died in a familiar way. Reassigned investigators. Mysteriously missing documents, administrative delays that dragged until the complainant finally gave up. One by one, voices fell silent. Fear didn't just hover in the precinct. It lived in it, breathed in it, dictated its culture. Behind closed doors, Briggs reveled in the power. He believed departments worked best when run like fortresses, with him as the unchallenged commander. He patrolled the hallways not as a leader, but as an overseer, inspecting loyalty with every passing glance. Officers learned to tread lightly, to speak softly, to avoid even accidental defiance. His approval became currency. His wrath, a sentence, but arrogance breeds blindness. Briggs mistook silence for respect, compliance for loyalty, and fear for control. He believed his kingdom was ironclad, invincible, immune to scrutiny. And every time he dismissed a complaint or intimidated a subordinate, he strengthened that belief. The higher he climbed, the more untouchable he felt, till eventually. He behaved as if the entire system existed to serve him. And yet, despite his empire of fear, there was one courtroom he couldn't bully. From the moment Andrew Napolitano first stepped into a courtroom, he felt the weight of what justice demanded. Not the grandeur, not the power, but the responsibility. He wasn't the loudest voice, nor the tallest presence. But there was something in his posture, unshakable stillness, that made people instinctively lower theirs. Where others relied on force or intimidation, he relied on clarity. Where others flinched at pressure, he breathed through it. His principles weren't slogans. They were the spine he stood on. He built his early career not by winning easy cases, but by taking the ones no one else wanted, cases that forced him to choose between comfort and conviction. He once defended a factory worker whose employer tried to bury a workplace injury under mountains of legal threats. The political winds were firmly against him. Donors whispered, party leaders frowned, and a senior official pulled him aside to suggest dropping the case. It was his first taste of real pressure, the kind that tests a young lawyer's soul. But Napolitano refused. When asked why, he said simply, "The Constitution does not tremble before power, and neither should we." The case would go on to change labor protections across the district. Years later, long after he ascended to the bench, he faced a moment that nearly broke him. A high-profile corruption trial had wrapped up, and he delivered a verdict that enraged a political titan. The backlash was immediate news headlines, twisting his words. Private threats arriving in envelopes with no return address. Even colleagues urging him to lie low, alone in his chambers late one night. Surrounded by stacks of legal briefs and the faint hum of a failing desk lamp, he wondered if it was worth it. If standing for the law meant standing alone, could he keep going? He sat there for hours, the silence heavy enough to crush anyone not anchored by purpose. But then he remembered something his father told him. When he was a boy, "Your name is the only thing you truly own. Guard it like your life depends on it. Because one day, it will." In that still moment, he made himself a promise, one that would define every ruling, every confrontation. Every breath he took from the bench onward, no man, no badge, no title. No office would ever stand above the law in his courtroom. From that day forward, Napolitano carried himself with a certain gravity, a quiet conviction that didn't need to be announced. Lawyers who entered his courtroom felt it instantly. Officers testified differently in front of him, as if the truth held more weight in his presence. Even bureaucrats who usually swaggered through hearings straightened their backs when they approached his bench. He treated the powerless with dignity and the powerful with fairness. Immigrant families who barely spoke English found understanding in his patience. Young activists found hope in his reasoning. And those who tried to twist the law for personal gain found themselves facing a judge who wouldn't bend, not even an inch. Through decades of service, his reputation grew not as the judge who sought the spotlight, but as the one who never flinched from it when principle demanded he stand firm. He had weathered storms, political and personal, yet remained unwavering, guided by that one unbreakable vow he made in the solitude of his chambers, and this promise made decades. Earlier was about to be tested harder than ever. The temperature in the room seemed to rise the moment the hearing resumed. The chief sat with his shoulders squared, tapping his fingers against the table as if the courtroom existed solely to irritate him. Judge Napolitano reopened the session with the same steady tone he had carried from the start, patient, measured, unshakable. But that composure only sharpened the chief's agitation. When the judge asked for clarification on a patrol discrepancy, the chief let out a scoff loud enough for the microphones to catch. "We're really wasting time on this?" he muttered, not bothering to hide his contempt. The spectators exchanged quick glances. Napolitano didn't flinch. He simply repeated the question, slower, clearer. As though the chief's attitude had no more effect than a passing breeze, that restraint was gasoline on the chief's temper. "I've run this department for 15 years, he snapped, talking over the judge. "You think I'm going to sit here and let you nitpick how I operate?" His voice rumbled like distant thunder. Reporters shifted in their seats, sensing the energy change. Napolitano responded with a single raised eyebrow, nothing more. The judge's calm wasn't passive. It was deliberate. Every word was chosen to keep the proceedings anchored in law, not ego. And that contrast to law against ego cut straight through the room. The chief leaned forward, jaw tightening, jabbing a finger in the air as he interrupted again. "I have the support of my entire city council," he boasted. "I don't answer to anyone, not even this circus." Still, Napolitano remained composed. "You are answering to the facts," he said quietly, and somehow that softness carried more weight than any shout could have. The calmness wasn't just disarming. It was humiliating to a man who fed on dominance. The chief's face reddened, his breath shortening with every attempt to reassert control. Spectators leaned in, the air thick with anticipation. Phones vibrated as cautious texts and updates buzzed through pockets. Even the bailiff shifted, uncertain whether to be ready for an outburst or to trust the judge's unwavering presence. Napolitano's next question was simple, procedural, almost gentle. But to a man already cracking under the pressure of losing control, it felt like an insult. The chief's chair screeched back an inch as he straightened, eyes burning with something raw and volatile. Everyone could feel it. He was teetering on the edge of something reckless, something irreversible. And the judge's silence, patient and expectant, was the final spark. But no one expected the line he would cross next. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Chief Randall Briggs's voice had just boomed across the room, dripping with arrogance and venom. "I own you, pig." Every head turned. Every eye widened. The words echoed off the walls like a gunshot. Cameras froze on the scene. Reporters' pens hovered in midair. And even the seasoned officers in the back instinctively straightened. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the entire system had been knocked off its axis. Judge Andrew Napolitano leaned back slightly, unflinching, his gaze locking on the chief. There was no flinch, no tremor in his voice, just the quiet, measured exhale of a man who had seen the worst and refused to be intimidated. The gallery waited. The chief expected fear, a retort, a sign that his dominance would go unchallenged. Instead, there was calm, perfect, unshakable calm. Napolitano's voice finally cut through the tension. Low and deliberate. Your words do not intimidate this court. Chief, they reveal exactly what the public already fears, that power without accountability is dangerous. Each syllable landed like a hammer, deliberate and precise. The chief's smirk faltered. Murmurs rippled through the room. Even his inner circle glanced at each other nervously. Step by step, Napolitano dismantled him. First, he cited internal records that documented every allegation the chief had brushed aside, every officer he had silenced. Then, he invoked legal precedents showing that no badge, no rank, no public adoration could grant immunity from the law. The gallery leaned in. Each point was a blow, measured, precise, undeniable. The judge paused briefly, letting the weight of his words settle, watching the chief shift uncomfortably. Then came the hidden testimony a whistleblower officer. Previously too terrified to speak, had recorded private conversations where Briggs admitted manipulating crime statistics and threatening staff. Napolitano didn't shout it. He didn't need to. The truth itself carried the room. The evidence laid bare made the chief's arrogance crumble visibly. His hands fidgeted. His confident stance sagged. Gasps filled the courtroom as Napolitano concluded, his voice steady, moral authority radiating. You built an empire of fear. Chief, but today, we measure power not by intimidation, but by justice. And the law is not intimidated. It does not bend. It does not yield. The gallery erupted soft at first, then louder, officers whispering, spectators clapping. Cameras catching every expression of disbelief and awe. Briggs's face was pale, his usual swagger gone. The empire, he thought, untouchable, lay exposed in the most public arena imaginable. Napolitano's calm had shattered it not with anger, but with the relentless weight of truth, principle, and law. Every word, every pause, every reference to justice had landed like a nail sealing the chief's downfall. By the time the gavel fell, the courtroom wasn't just reacting to a verdict. It was witnessing the collapse of arrogance itself. And yet, even as the chief slumped, defeated and silent, a ripple of anticipation spread through the city and across the nation. The confrontation was over.
Ow!
But the shockwaves were only beginning. Within hours, clips from the courtroom had flooded every screen in the country. The moment when Chief Randall Briggs had shouted, "I own you, pig," and Judge Napolitano's measured, devastating response became the centerpiece of viral news. Hashtags trended on every platform. Hashtag justice over fear. Hashtag Napolitano stands. Hashtag chief exposed. Memes proliferated, some highlighting the chief's collapse, others celebrating the calm authority of a man who refused to be intimidated. Each post, each share, spread like wildfire, drawing more eyes, more outrage, more conversation. Former officers, once too fearful to speak, began reaching out to journalists. Anonymous tips, confessions, and long-suppressed complaints poured in. They described years of intimidation, manipulated reports, and the quiet fear that had hung over precincts like a cloud. One retired sergeant spoke to a local news outlet, voice trembling. "We all knew he could ruin your career with a word. But seeing him confronted, it's like the air cleared for the first time in decades." Journalists dug deeper. Investigative reports unearthed patterns of misconduct, cover-ups, and favoritism that spanned Briggs's entire tenure. Each article painted a portrait of a system that allowed one man's ego to eclipse the law. Editorials debated the culture of unchecked authority in law enforcement, questioning how many more untouchables might still operate in silence beyond scrutiny. Politicians reacted swiftly. Those who had once aligned with Briggs distanced themselves, releasing statements emphasizing accountability and rule of law. The chief's allies scrambled, issuing half-hearted defenses that only further highlighted the magnitude of his downfall. Across talk shows, podcasts, and live broadcasts, the courtroom clip was replayed endlessly. Each analysis dissecting Napolitano's composure, strategy, and moral authority. Public reaction wasn't limited to commentary. Social movements seized the moment, organizing town halls and panels on police reform, ethics, and accountability. Citizens debated the meaning of power, the courage required to confront it, and the responsibility of every individual to uphold justice, even when the system seemed rigged. Teachers, activists, and community leaders shared the clip in classrooms and meetings, framing it as a lesson in integrity and courage under pressure. Yet amid all the noise, one message from Judge Napolitano rose above everything else. It wasn't the viral clip, the scolding, or the gavelette. Was the quiet reminder that authority carries responsibility, and that dignity, truth, and law endure even when fear seems to dominate. It was a principle that resonated far beyond the courtroom walls, echoing in hearts and screens across the nation, leaving every viewer asking themselves, how would they stand when confronted by their own untouchable? In the days following the courtroom spectacle, Judge Andrew Napolitano addressed the public not through anger, not through condemnation, but through clarity and conviction. His words were measured, yet carried the weight of experience and principle. Authority is a responsibility, he began, not a license to dominate. Power is not proof of superiority. It is a call to serve truth, justice, and the dignity of every individual. He reminded viewers that the badge, the uniform, the office, they exist to protect, not to intimidate. Every word he spoke was a lesson in accountability, that no position, no title, and no ego places a person above the law. He spoke of the courage required to uphold these values, acknowledging the quiet heroes who, every day, choose integrity over fear. His voice resonated not just with those in law enforcement, but with anyone who had ever faced authority and wondered whether standing up mattered. Napolitano framed the chief's outburst as a symptom, not a singular villainy. It was a reminder of what happens when systems prioritize obedience over conscience, when intimidation replaces accountability. But rather than dwelling on shame, he redirected attention to hope. When we confront arrogance with truth, when we meet fear with integrity, we create a society where justice is not optionally, is inevitable. The message transcended the courtroom. Citizens, activists, and viewers everywhere felt a sense of empowerment. It wasn't about celebrating the fall of one man. It was about embracing the principle that every person, regardless of rank, must answer to a higher standard. Napolitano's words became a rallying cry for responsibility, for courage, and for dignity. As he concluded, there was a palpable sense of uplift, a moral clarity that lingered in the air. Let this moment remind us all that our true power lies not in what we command, but in what we protect. Justice, dignity, and truth are the legacies we leave behind. In that simple, profound framing, the public found inspiration. The courtroom drama had ended, but the lesson, the reaffirmation that integrity and courage always, triumph would resonate far longer than any viral clip or fleeting scandal. The moment Judge Napolitano stood firm as Chief Briggs screamed, "I own you, pig," became more than a courtroom headline. It became a lesson for everyone watching. Dignity always defeats arrogance. This was not just a battle between two men. It was a confrontation between fear and principle, between unchecked power and unwavering integrity. Every viewer who witnessed it felt the weight of that truth and the promise it carries. That courage and moral clarity can topple even the most intimidating authority. Stories like this matter because they remind us that accountability is not optional, that justice is not reserved for the powerful, and that standing up for what is right, even when the odds seem insurmountable, can change the course of a system. Judge Napolitano's .com precise and principled response serves as a blueprint for confronting challenges in our own lives. Respond with clarity, not rage. With evidence, not emotion. With courage, not fear. If this story inspired you, if it reminded you that every voice matters and every act of integrity counts, then take action. Subscribe to stay connected with stories that champion truth and justice. Share this video to spark conversation, to remind others that courage and dignity are contagious. Engage with your community, amplify voices that uphold accountability, and never underestimate the power of standing firm. The courtroom may have been the stage, but the lesson is universal. integrity over intimidation, principle over ego, and courage over fear. Let this be a call to everyone watching. Your actions, your voice, and your commitment to truth matter. Keep watching, keep learning, and keep holding power accountable, because in every confrontation, dignity always prevails.